There's an upcoming game. We've talked about it a little bit. But honestly, there's not much to talk about because the game's barely been revealed and we don't have a lot to go on at this point. But there are some things people are taking from it, looking to old interviews and then inferring from there what we're going to get. Of course, I'm talking about Intergalactic, the Heretic Prophet. I think the game probably ends up being, very impressive because it's Naughty Dog and they always make very impressive stuff, whether you love the stories or not. Technically, they're very, very impressive games. But there's not much to go on with any of this. And my insistence has been from the outset of this trailer that it's just not a very good trailer. It tells you basically nothing about the game itself. So I just don't think it's a great trailer. So I don't blame people for being kind of not that stoked on it compared to some of the trailers we got for other games that they've done. That being said, people have gone back into the archives and they've found interviews from Neil Druckmann back during the period when this game would have started production. And this follows other rumors that are coming on, which is that playtesters who have been experimenting, not playtesters, developers who are working on the game, have alluded to it being all about player freedom and isolation. And specifically, apparently, the devs are comparing the game in structure to Elden Ring, of all games. Which is surprising because Elden Ring is very, very, very different from anything they've ever made before. But that's apparently what they are comparing it to internally and bringing up a lot. Yeah, as you can see, as first reported by The Gamer, MinMax's Ben Hansen revealed that Intergalactic, the Heretic Prophet's approach to player freedom will be inspired by FromSoft's Elden Ring, saying, I think it's fine to say now that the game was Elden Ring, that it was compared to back then. If I would have said Naughty Dog's next game is like Elden Ring, and then that reveal trailer came out, I feel like we would have been lit on fire. Back in October, Hansen's first teased information about the player freedom in Naughty Dog's next game, but refrained from actually naming the title until now. And this is something that's come up a few times, is suggestions that it's focused on player freedom, isolation, and exploration. But there's this clip that Neil Druckmann, from an interview Neil Druckmann did with the Washington Post back in 2023. Gene Park clipped this and put it up, saying, I talked to Neil Druckmann about how he's intrigued by Elden Ring. This is absolutely the track. So just listen to this little clip from Neil back in 2023.
I do think I'm more recently intrigued by stuff like Elden Ring and Inside that doesn't rely as much on traditional narrative to tell its story. And I think there's some of the best storytelling in The Last of Us. Yes, a lot of it is in the cinematics, but a lot of it is in gameplay and moving around the space and understanding a history of a space by just looking at it and examining it. And to me, that's right now is some of the best joy I get out of games that trust their audience to figure things out, that don't hold their hand. That's the stuff I'm really intrigued by going forward. And again, it doesn't mean we will never have dialogue or cutscenes. I think those are tools in your toolbox. Okay. And it's about how to use all these different aspects, some of it from other medium, some of it found notes and environmental storytelling. And I think there's a way to push that stuff forward, at least for the kind of games that we make at Naughty Dog. I'm really intrigued, again, never resting on our laurels and trying something a little bit new, a little bit different that not everyone's going to like, but that's okay. And again, it's stuff that we're working on now. I can tell you that the teams are very excited by the different projects we have at Naughty
Dog. He's mentioning the other projects they're working on. He's mentioning that he's interested in new directions, new ideas, fresh routes, techniques for storytelling. But what particularly interests him is the open-ended exploration and environmental storytelling in Elden Ring and games like Inside, which don't have complex tutorials. They don't have quest journals, in the traditional sense. They are much more about releasing the player and letting them figure it out. And that seems to be their goal with Intergalactic, the Heretic Prophet. They've said it's a game about isolationism. It's about feeling alone. It's about trying to escape and find your way out of a very complex situation after you crash on this planet. So I think there's a strong possibility that the premise upon which this game is being built is that you end up crash landing on this planet, and then they just release the player. And they're like, just go figure it out. Try to get off the planet. And they just leave it open-ended like that. Because one of the things that Neil has discussed in other talks and interviews is that they try, when they're building this stuff, they try to figure out what their pillars are. For lack of a better term, they try to figure out what the game is about, what the core aspects of it are, and then they build upon that. And if the core of the game is to literally just trust the player and not handhold them, I think that creates a much more, a very different game than traditional Naughty Dog games, which would be very interesting if people are like, oh, I love Naughty Dog games for the intense cinematics and then the set pieces and stuff like that. This game might not have a lot of that, or it might have a lot of it, but it's not in the standard structure, and it's much more open-ended, which is just very, 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 very different. You know, Why So Snowy says, I think it's important to remember that from the Grounded documentary about The Last of Us Part 2, they stated that their inspiration was from Bloodborne. The game started with melee combat being important. Well, there you go. It's, I think with all of these things, the devs at these studios are not just playing their own games, they're playing other games too. And you can often see where the inspirations lie with a lot of these, where it's like, oh, I can tell with AC Origins, they played a lot of The Witcher, or they played a lot of maybe, little tidbits of Breath of the Wild. They saw interviews and breakdowns of that before it released and wanted to implement some ideas from there. Like, oh, you can light your bow and arrow, you can light the arrow on fire and then shoot it, and that lights a fire over here. You can always tell like where the inspirations came from based on what the team was playing and what they thought could be cool to implement into their own game. And I think that, Neil, he played Elden Ring, thought that was fascinating, and was like, why am I connecting to this so much when my hand is not being held, when they're not having to do the things we've done in our games? Why does this still work? Let's explore it. And so I'm starting to think, especially as we hear more of these rumors and discussions, interviews about this type of thing, it starts to make me think that this is going to be very, very different than people expect, which just reaffirms the idea that I think the trailer didn't do a great job of communicating what the game is going to be, which begs the question, like, well, then why have the trailer? But still. Who said you buy her hair as DLC? How dare you? Let's see if there's anything else in here. Yeah, Hansen said that the title would have a lot of player freedom, was similar in structure to a certain game, but didn't want to say what game he was referring to. I think we talked about this on stream, this initial post where he was like, it's going to have a lot of player freedom, but I don't want to say what game people are comparing it to. I heard from someone very in the know who worked on the Heretic Prophet that they're like, Jesus Christ. The tone was like, you are not ready for how amazing this thing is going to be. The tone was, I'm not going to say the name of the game they compared it to. Now we know it's Elden Ring, but they compared it to a game with a lot of player freedom. So for months and months, they've been suggesting, at least, this person who has contacts, allegedly, is comparing it and saying, this is basically Naughty Dog's Elden Ring. Probably not entirely focused on boss fights, but maybe they end up doing that. But either way, it's going to be very different from The Last of Us, from Uncharted, from any of these games that they've done before, which is interesting. Because sometimes new genres, new approaches from studios that are very accomplished, sometimes that goes fantastically well. Other times, not so much. But sometimes it goes fantastically well. And I am excited to see what they've got, because this is very much a new thing for them. So we'll see. We'll see. He took my thing.